So now I'm going to layer the cake now. You've seen the preparing of the acrylic rings with the OHP sheet inside, right? So if you have an acrylic ring to the size of the cake that you're going to do, then that way is pretty much straightforward. Now say suppose you do not have the acrylic ring in the size of the cake that you're making, like maybe we could be making bigger cakes, and what if we can't find the rings to the size of the pan? So you could layer, line the cake pan itself, the same cake pan from which you had baked the sponges. So this is an 8-inch sponge, and what I have done to just make it easy for me to lift the cake, it's been lined with a cling wrap at the bottom. Okay, so there's cling wrap at the bottom, and then this part remains the same, which is using the OHP sheet around. So the layering will be done, and obviously the wall is not enough in the cake pan, but that doesn't matter. This still works out quite fine, which is using the OHP sheet itself to the height you think you will need as you're layering the sponges. Okay, so this is the prepared cake pan for layering, and now I'm just going to toast the sponges. So now this will be common for you to understand how to layer, which means irrespective of whether you're going to do a whipped cream cake or a ganache cake or a buttercream cake and any filling or frosting, this layering step has to be there. So I'm starting to insist this step before moving on to actually frosting the cake, because it makes the life very easy, because you don't have to worry about the fillings oozing out and all, and this is just another additional step. But then we also need the wait time, like 4 to 8 hours or maybe overnight, layering and then freezing, and then to work on the sharp edges on the sides is just making the life easier. So we'll stick to this step of layering, which is going to make it a must for the rest of the course. So what I am going to do now is use a fatless sponge. So you know that we'll be baking the cake and then out of the oven in 15 minutes on the wire rack. We'll cling wrap it while the cake is still warm in 2 layers of cling wrap, and then freeze them immediately while the cake is still warm. While putting in the freezer, we will just lay them one next to the other. We are not going to stack the cakes immediately when you're going to keep it in the freezer. What will happen if you're going to stack them inside the freezer? The weight of the topmost sponge will weigh down the bottommost sponge, and then the size will expand, the height will reduce. So you don't do that until the cake sponges, which are cling wrapped, are one next to the other and frozen, after which you could stack because you want free space in the freezer, right? So overnight the sponges have to be freezing, and then you will take it out of the freezer depending on what sponge you're using. Say suppose a butter cake or an oil cake or a chiffon or a fatless sponge, the time of thawing will vary. So the butter cake would take about say half an hour. The fatless sponges will just take about 5 to 10 minutes to thaw. Oil cake should be anywhere in between, like 20 minutes is the thaw time that you could just wait, taking the cake out of the freezer. So your preparations of your cream and the rest of the other stuffs, you need to keep in mind how long you need to wait for your sponges to thaw. That is the first thing. So the second thing is, once you thaw, the thawing time, the cling wrap should be on the cake. You're not supposed to remove the cling wrap while it is thawing, because what happens when the cakes thaw, the condensation will happen. The water droplets will form on the outside of the cake if you're going to remove the cling wrap, and that water droplets will be absorbed by the sponge and the sponge will lose its original texture. So leave the cling wrap on during the thaw time, let the condensation get over. You will have water droplets on top of the cling wrap, and you could just wipe that and then remove the cling wrap, and after which is what your sponge is ready for you to toast. Okay, so these are very important pointers you need to keep in mind. Otherwise you're just going to have some weird textured sponge that you will be layering, and you don't want to have surprises that your client is going to complain saying maybe the cake is fudgy and stuff like that. You just want to retain the original texture. So this is a fatless sponge, and that is what I would suggest to use along with whipped cream layering, you could also use oil based sponges for whipped cream, and do not use a butter based cake. That is for the version using eggs. They are pretty much, you can't call it denser, but then the logic is using whipped cream together with a sponge that can be refrigerated and it will still remain soft, taking it directly out of the refrigerator, and to cut through the slice, the knife should pass through easily, right? Now if you're going to use a butter based sponge together with a whipped cream filling, now the whipped cream has to be cut directly out of the fridge, but the butter based sponge will be hard from the fridge directly. So then the knife going through, you will have difference in the textures. The whipping cream will pass through easily with a knife, and the butter based sponge will just, it will hinder, your knife will not pass through that, and that difference in the texture coordination has to be there when you're going to blend. So this can be a fatless sponge or an oil based sponge, because I'm going to use whipping cream to layer. Now if you're going to use the same technique of layering for ganache cake or butter cake, you need to choose your sponges accordingly. Now as per the lesson that I will be telling you what kind of sponge you will need to layer for each of the frosting that we will be doing across the course. And for the ganache cake and the whipped cream cake, I'll be using sugar syrup, which is here. I'll be brushing in onto each layer. And for ganache cake, it's a choice when you're using oil based sponge. Depending on how moist you want, you could use sugar syrup. So it's a choice when you're using oil based sponge. But a chiffon kind of a sponge, obviously sugar syrup is necessary when you're layering it between the filling. It could be a flavored whipping cream or just whipping cream. And for butter based sponge, do not use sugar syrup, because this is that one common lesson that you need to be understanding and taking down your notes. And just because this video has sugar syrup in the sponge in the layering, while layering for your buttercream cake after watching this, you should not use sugar syrup, and that is very important that you need to keep in mind. Okay, so that's a serrated knife that I'm going to use. So toting the cake is like, just find like how many layers you're going to tote it. You could do it in 3 layers if you want, like really thinner sponge layers. I'm just going to do 2. So first, do not put the knife inside, okay, and then make a marking on the edge, and once the knife marking is met, and then let the knife go in and keep pushing, and make sure the knife is here on the outside. And once the ends meet, you will have the sponges toted. You can see it's like a really soft sponge which will soak up quite a bit of sugar syrup. So I'm just going to tote all the sponge. So the second one is also toted. So on the third one is also done. I'm just going to put them aside. You can see it's like really extremely light, and that's what I like about it, because it's going to keep the whipping cream cake, the layered cake, also extremely lightweight, and it could soak up all the flavors. So now I'm just going to use the whipping cream. The stabilized whipping cream is filled in the piping bag. I'm just going to chop it. So the inside of the pan, I'm just going to pipe in a bit of the cream. Okay, so into that I'm just going to place the first layer, so you could keep the porous side up, so the sugar syrup soaking will be quite good. Okay, so that's how it is. Into this, because it's a whipped cream cake, because the sponge is fatless, I'm going to use sugar syrup. Obviously, for a whipped cream cake, you have to have sugar syrup. So without sugar syrup, you cannot be doing your whipped cream cake. Okay, so after finishing one whole brushing up of the sugar syrup throughout the surface once, now you want to do one more time as well, because you need to have the whipped cream cakes quite moist, otherwise the cake is going to become very dry. So now I'm just going to start piping in the whipping cream, starting from the outside edge and then go up till the center. So once you've piped what you need for one layer, and then on top of that I'm going to place another sponge where the porous side is going to be on the top. And just press through around on the edges to make sure the layer is all straight, and then I'm just going to continue adding the sugar syrup, same level, like quite a bit. That would be enough for the entire sponge to get soaked up. So let me continue doing this and I will catch you up when I'm just on the topmost layer of the sponge. So I'm here with the last layer. I'm just going to place the last layer on top. You can see how the layers just built. So now this will go into the freezer after I have just done with the final layer. So I'm just going to add sugar syrup. First just start on with the edges. So done with a good amount of sugar syrup. So the last layer will be again another layer of whipped cream, because you don't want to stop with just the sponge because it will start drying out. You just need to seal the cake completely. So this can be a thin layer because after it's all prepped up, we will move on to doing the sharp edges. At that stage we will anyway be using up some more cream on the top. I'm just going to use the spatula, an offset spatula, and just seal, so you can see gaps. Okay, you just don't want that be exposed, so just cover it completely. It doesn't have to be like super flat or neat. We are only trying to seal any gaps like that. and no air passes through, or there is no space for the moisture from the cake to pass on the outside. Now this entire cake, the whole thing has to be cling wrapped as well. So I'm just going to wrap this whole thing, though we have just sealed in sides with OHP and the top with the cream. You don't even want the cream to again get dried up, and you don't want any gaps in between. That would just dry the entire layering. So the layers are done, and now this will go into the freezer for minimum 4 hours. And if you're going to frost tomorrow, I mean the next day, then you could just layer it in the evening of the previous day and then put it in the freezer overnight is also good. And if you are just going to plan to do it on the same day and you just missed out to layer it the previous day, then you could do it in the morning, allow at least 4 hours in the freezer, so we'll be just able to open it up and then start frosting. And now here what you need to keep in mind is this is the layerings lesson, and with this you need to be layering all the cakes that we will be frosting for all the sharp edges, irrespective of whether it is whipped cream or buttercream or ganache or square cake or any shape for that matter. If it is a square cake that you will be working on, then you will do that in a square pan and then line it with OHP. Just make sure you're just folding the ends of the corners of the square, so your lining is quite stiff there. And once you keep putting your square sponges inside the square cake pan or a cake ring, the OHP will just align itself, letting you to do the filling. So to keep in mind, use sugar syrup for whipping cream, compulsory 100%. For ganache cake, you can choose to use sugar syrup. If you're using an oil based sponge, you could use sugar syrup. If you are doing a butter based sponge, then you can choose not to use. That is for the ganached cake. But if you are going to do a buttercream cake and going for a butter based sponge, do not use sugar syrup while layering. So once you're done with this, and then we move on to the next step, where we will learn how to do the sharp edges on each of these medium in their respective lessons.